Welcome to our channel, all friends. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe my channel and press the bell icon to stay update for new videos. Thanks. Let's start new video. When I had not even completed my matriculation, the marriage proposals started coming in. My parents wanted me to be married into an educated family. They also wished that I would complete my BA before getting married. The proposals kept coming, but my parents' constant response was that their daughter was still studying. When I was in the final year of my BA, a proposal for a young man named Hassan came. He was in Australia, and the proposal was brought by his mother and sister. They saw me and immediately liked me. Before leaving, they asked my mother for a photo of me to send to Hassan in Australia so he could have a look at it. My mother didn't agree to this. She made an excuse that there was no good picture of me at home at that time, but she would have one clicked and give it later. These women didn't like my mother's response, and they told my father that they would bring Hassan with them once he arrived from Australia, and then we could show him the picture. 2 months later, Hassan's mother and sister came again, saying that Hassan had arrived from Australia and now they wanted the photo. My mother replied, "You bring your son to our house and let him see the picture himself." Hassan's sister said, "The times have changed, Auntie. You are still thinking the old way, but we will bring our son with us tomorrow, as we already like your daughter." The very next day, they brought Hassan along. They showed him my picture, and Hassan, a handsome young man, liked it. Our families also liked him, and Hassan immediately decided he wanted to marry me. The wedding date was set on that same day. Hassan had to go back to Australia in a month, so the wedding had to be arranged quickly. The issue of booking a hall came up, and everyone got busy with the preparations. Then there was an issue with a cousin of mine who had been living in London for a long time. My parents had arranged a marriage for me with his son, Arslan, when we were kids. Later, Arslan and his family didn't visit Pakistan for a long time, and my parents assumed that they had forgotten about the alliance and didn't want to proceed with it. However, my father still contacted my aunt, who often traveled between Pakistan and London, and asked her to inquire about it. She returned from London and told my father that Arslan had chosen another girl for himself, and his parents wanted to marry him to her, not to me. After this, my parents completely forgot about that relationship. The day before my wedding, Arslan and his parents unexpectedly arrived from London when they found out that I was getting married. They created a big scene, and my uncle started arguing with my father, asking how he dared to marry me to someone else when they had already arranged our marriage in our childhood. My father told him, "I had sent Salima to you to inquire about your intentions, and she came back saying that Arslan had chosen another girl. He didn't want to marry me." My uncle and aunt caused a ruckus, insisting that Salima never told them such a thing. It later turned out that my aunt had wanted Arslan to marry me, while my mother disliked this idea, so she had lied to break the connection between our families. At this stage, with only 2 days left for my wedding, they came and created confusion. My father told them, "You all have been sleeping for all these years, and not once did you contact us about the marriage. Now, when the wedding cards are already distributed, you want to stop the marriage? Don't you care about what people will think of me?" My uncle and aunt reluctantly agreed, but the real issue was with Arslan. Since he had seen me, he started pressuring his parents to stop the wedding and marry me instead. He had fallen for me at first sight. My parents tried to explain to him that my uncle wouldn't agree now and nothing could be done. They explained that in our culture, when someone gives their word, they must stick to it, and those who go back on their word lose their honor in society and community. They advised him to forget about it. But for him, it was hard to let go of his feelings. Arslan couldn't find peace for a moment. Overcome by his feelings, he came to me and with folded hands, begged me to refuse the marriage, saying that if I didn't, he would take his life. My uncle and father were not agreeing. I was sitting in my room when he said this. At that moment, Hassan's aunt arrived at our house with henna, and when she overheard Arslan's words, she immediately went back and reported it to Hassan's father, saying, "Your future daughter-in-law's lover is begging her like this. How can you decide to make her your bride? She clearly likes her cousin, Arslan." 2 women from the beauty parlor had arrived to prepare me. Just then, 2 men from Hassan's family came and spoke to my father, making him anxious. After a while, my mother, father, and brothers left for Hassan's house. The house became silent for hours, and when they returned, No one said anything to me, but their faces were filled with sadness. Soon after, Hassan's father, accompanied by his sister, came to our house and said, "The wedding procession will not come because your daughter's marriage is being forced, and she doesn't want to marry my son. Therefore, this marriage is not valid. Marry your daughter where she wishes." My father started pleading, "What are you saying? Someone has told you a lie. Our daughter's marriage is happening with her full consent. If you want, you can ask her yourself." My father said, "Please don't say such things. Our house is full of guests, and this is a matter of our honor. What will people say if you don't bring the wedding procession?" Hassan's family refused to bring the procession, and despite my mother's tears, my father's pleas, and my brother's requests, they insisted they wouldn't come. My father tried to talk to Hassan, but his family stopped him and didn't let him talk to him. Meanwhile, the wedding guests were waiting and time was slipping away. The procession had yet to arrive. When my aunt told me what was happening, my heart sank. I began cursing Arslan for ruining my parents' happiness and putting us in such a difficult situation. I felt like asking Hassan when he arrived, "What is my fault? Why am I being punished when I am innocent?" I felt like setting fire to my bridal dress and hanging Arslan with my red dupatta. I was innocent, yet I was being rejected. My father had a heart condition, and I was scared he would have a breakdown from the shock. He was barely holding himself together. It was a matter of his dignity. Meanwhile, my uncle and aunt from London had left in anger, and no one knew whether they had gone to a hotel or a relative's house. They said they wouldn't attend the wedding anymore. Had they been here, I would have asked them, "I am your daughter, so why am I being punished? And for what crime?" We were all deeply worried. Another aunt suggested, "Let's find Arslan and marry him off to her. Otherwise, we won't be able to show our faces to anyone." When I heard this, I felt like banging my head in frustration. I hated Arslan for what he had done, coming from London and burning my life and my parents' happiness. At that moment, my aunt and uncle reconciled and went to Hassan's house. They met him and asked, "Are you an honorable man?" He replied, "Alhamdulillah." They asked, "Then why did you refuse the marriage at the last moment?" "Our guests are here waiting for the procession and it's not coming. Do you know what we are going through?" Hassan replied, "I didn't refuse the marriage. Your daughter did. She is the one who said she doesn't want to marry me." My aunt replied, "This is wrong. Someone has told you a lie." Hassan said, "That's what I was told. What should we do now? Should we leave the bride alone on the stage because the groom is not coming with the procession?" Hassan remained silent for a while before saying, "Please let me speak to Shumaila. I want to hear from her directly whether she accepts or refuses to marry me. If she says she doesn't want to marry me, I will step aside. If she says she wants to marry me, I will definitely bring the procession," Hassan said. My uncle told them to stay by the phone and they would arrange for me to talk to Shumaila. The food was set in the hall and the guests were busy eating, as they couldn't wait any longer. They were exhausted from waiting for the procession. I was dressed and seated alone on the stage. Just then my aunt came, panting and shaking, and took me to the bride's room. My uncles were waiting for me there, and they were calling Hassan on the wedding hall's phone. They handed me the receiver and said, "Talk to Hassan." I had been praying for this moment, asking Allah to allow me to be seated in Hassan's bridal palanquin at that moment. Whatever would happen later, I wanted my father and brother's honor to be preserved in that moment. I spoke to Hassan on the phone and clearly told him that I had no connection with Arslan. I explained that Arslan and I were engaged in childhood, but before that I had never even met him. Upon hearing this, he assured me, "Don't worry, we are on our way with the procession now." I felt somewhat relieved after hearing this. A little while later, the guests had finished their meals and the imam was still waiting. Then there was an uproar. The groom had arrived. It turned out that some of our relatives had gone to find Arslan and told him to quickly change into groom's attire, as Hassan's family had refused to bring the procession, and the imam was still waiting. The bride was waiting on the stage for the groom. In the meantime, Hassan's procession had arrived, and now there was one bride but two grooms. It was an incredibly strange situation. They started calling Arslan to the stage. Someone mentioned that this wasn't Hassan, but Arslan, whose face was hidden behind the veil. The ground seemed to slip from under my feet. I was wearing Hassan's wedding dress and jewelry, And now Arslan was brought to the stage for the marriage. It felt like a complete spectacle. I burst into tears. My uncontrollable sobbing made Arslan nervous, and he asked, "Why are you crying?" I immediately told him, "I don't want to marry you, and I'm crying because of that. And beware, if you try to force me into marriage, I will dishonor you. Get off the stage immediately." He quickly stepped down from the stage. The guests were confused, not understanding what was happening. Two elders from the family came to me and said, "Shumaila, your father's honor is in your hands now. Don't insist on rejecting Arslan's marriage. Let the marriage happen because they won't come now." I replied, "Whether they come or not, I will not marry Arslan. I hate him." After speaking to Hassan on the phone, I was confident that he would arrive, and I should wait for him, as I had chosen to wear the bridal dress with his name in my heart. Seeing my firm stance, the elders stepped down from the stage. After the guests finished their meals, one by one they started leaving, disappointed. They kept asking, "Where is the procession? Why hasn't it come yet? And where is the groom?" Then the hall management arrived to clear the hall. I had to get down from the stage. My glittering bridal attire felt like a corpse being taken to the cemetery. I was thinking that now my father would never be able to show his face again. At that moment, the henna on my hands began to burn, as if it had turned into fire. I wondered when a bride's wedding dress would become her shroud. After taking a few steps, I felt faint and was about to collapse when someone caught me. It was Hassan. At that moment, a loud shout went up. "The procession has arrived! The procession has arrived!" Those who were leaving the hall came rushing back to see the procession, and the women gathered to celebrate. Hassan supported me and seated me back on the stage. He pulled up a chair and sat beside me. This saved my father's diminishing honor. At that moment, my brother went to fetch the imam and brought him back. And then I was married to Hassan. I don't even remember what was said or when I signed the marriage contract. After that, my groom Hassan embraced me and seated me in the car. Our house lit up once again with the sounds of celebration. On our wedding night, when Hassan lifted my veil, he said, "If you hadn't become my bride, I would have been the most unfortunate person. Allah has blessed me and had mercy on my prayers, and now I have my bride." If I hadn't married Hassan, I don't know what would have happened. More than me, I wonder how my father would have responded to all those who questioned him. I pray that no father ever has to go through this kind of helplessness for his daughter. May Allah protect the honor of daughters. Ameen.